How do you feel about the result of the elections?
I think it's really good for crypto. I think in the US, we'll probably see some sort of like bipartisan law passed that basically deregulates a lot of the DeFi stuff and then probably adds some like pretty simple regulatory frameworks around centralized exchanges and possibly stablecoins. So I think that, sort of the regulatory clarity for the space is pretty huge.
How do you feel about Polymarket?
I'm a fan. I think this election, was sort of the most that's ever been traded or bet on a prediction market ever. Something like when I kind of last looked at it on election night, it was like 3.6 billion or something. It probably ended up much higher by the end of the night. And it seems like the markets were right. Well, obviously, I do a lot of investing in early stage companies. I also do a good amount of like trading in my personal portfolio, both crypto and like equities.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on Ton?
I think it's like good for Telegram, and it's like it's beneficial to them. I think it's hard for it to like really break out of the Telegram ecosystem.
We're in Bangkok with Global Blockchain Show, and today I'm with Joey from Founders Fund. Joey, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. Tell me, how do you feel about the current scene here in Bangkok during DEF CON?
It seems pretty lively. Like there's a ton of people here, especially relative to most other conferences. Like I haven't been to the event yet, but just based on kind of all the people I've seen already randomly in like the hotel lobby and stuff, it seems to be pretty cool.
It's been quite the year. How would you define it?
I think this year is sort of like the preamble to kind of the rapid part of the bull market, which I think we're kind of starting to enter now. And so, I feel like things are probably going to get pretty crazy as we go into the end of this year and next year.
How do you feel about the result of the elections?
I think it's really good for crypto. I think in the US, we'll probably see some sort of like bipartisan law passed that basically deregulates a lot of the DeFi stuff and then probably adds some like pretty simple regulatory frameworks around centralized exchanges and possibly stablecoins. So I think that, sort of the regulatory clarity for the space is pretty huge.
It feels like the entire industry sort of like regrouped around DeFi and stablecoins, all even meme coins. It's all on the financial side, whereas before we had like NFTs and more all sort of things going on. Feels like the focus has come more now to its core. Do you see any particular reason for this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think sort of the finance stuff is sort of kind of the most natural application of blockchain tech. At the core of it, it's basically money and then ways to program that money. And so it sort of makes sense that the first big use cases would be financial ones. I think on the NFT side, there are still some interesting projects. Like at Founders Fund, we invested in like Pudgy Penguins, which I think is kind of one of the few really interesting NFT projects because they've got like exposure in the real world. Like you can buy them at like every Walmart and Target, like even the Walmarts in Puerto Rico, which is where I live. I've seen them like on the store shelf space, which is pretty wild. But I think outside of them, yeah, I'd say most of the stuff happening is in DeFi. You see things like Polymarket and prediction markets and stuff starting to take off.
How do you feel about Polymarket?
I'm a fan. I think this election, was sort of the most that's ever been traded or bet on a prediction market ever. Something like when I kind of last looked at it on election night, it was like 3.6 billion or something. It probably ended up much higher by the end of the night. And it seems like the markets were right, even kind of when all the other experts, were leaning towards Kamala. Even like Nate Silver's model had Kamala, at like 50.01% or something. But the prediction markets had her at like 40%. So I think it's cool to see that these markets like are starting to both take off and actually work.
What is exciting to you at the moment? Like what kind of sectors within crypto?
Outside of the prediction market stuff, there still is a good amount of infrastructure to be built out. Like I think, things like Polymarket wouldn't have worked without a lot of the scaling infrastructure that exists already today. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely more use cases that I think infrastructure will help solve. Things like the onboarding problem of how do you get a wallet if you're not, a crypto native person. There's companies working on that. There's also companies like Bridge, which got acquired by Stripe, that are working on like the fiat on-ramp problem, like how do you get dollars into crypto. So I'm excited about those sorts of developments in the space. And then I think I'm also sort of excited to see what new consumer things people start to develop over the next year or two. I think Polymarket has sort of proven that it is possible to build a consumer application where your end user probably isn't initially a native crypto person, but it's just someone who's interested in either betting on the election or interested in what are the odds that Trump wins or not. And so I think that's sort of proven out that like the 0 to 1 piece, like, okay, you can actually use crypto in a way where it's additive to the product experience. And I'm interested to see kind of what other interesting things founders start to build now that kind of like people have proven that it's possible.
Which markets do you find most interesting?
I think on the prediction market side, I think the most interesting ones are like things that, so I do a lot of like, well, obviously I do a lot of investing in early stage companies. I also do a good amount of like trading in my personal portfolio, both crypto and like equities. And so on the prediction market side, I'm interested in markets that tell me more about the world so it can then inform my trading. And so examples would be like, all the stuff that's happening in the Middle East. There's a bunch of markets on whether certain countries will invade or bomb other countries, things like that, where it's like it's actually very useful to know how much of this rhetoric is just countries kind of, sort of like talking to talk versus how much is like, oh, actually, no, they are actually going to, bomb this region or that region, because that impacts financial markets globally, whether it's like the price of oil or whether it's just like risk off sentiment. Because if there's, if anytime there's war, there tends to be a short-term period where the markets go risk off. So those ones have been pretty interesting. And then obviously the other one that was really interesting recently is the election stuff, because that kind of drives, the price action of a ton of other financial assets. And then I think going forward, I'm interested to see like there's a bunch of new markets now on like Trump's various policy initiatives. Like, will this thing actually happen or not? Or like who will be the director of, who will be like Secretary of State, stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see those markets play out too.
Interesting. Yeah. It sounds like you spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I mean, I use it for like the informational purpose, and I think it is actually very, very useful information that informs like other day-to-day stuff. Like even like you go back a year ago, there was a Polymarket market on like, will Sam Altman be rehired at OpenAI? And like half the Founders Fund team was like watching that market very closely because we have a position in OpenAI, and so we wanted to know what's going to happen here. And so it's cool for stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Within crypto, there's so many sectors. You mentioned consumer. Is there any other that is particularly exciting for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always also been into the infrastructure stuff, mostly on the early stage. Especially when I got started in this space, it was really hard to build anything. I guess to frame it, like Solidity didn't exist, and there weren't like tools.
What year was it?
This is like 2014.
Okay.
So it was a programming language called Serpent. And anyway, stuff has evolved a lot, but I still think there's a lot of kind of low-hanging infrastructure to be built out. Like on the Solana side, we invested in Helios, which I think is sort of like the best infrastructure company that helps make it easier for developers to build on Solana. And I think there's on the Ethereum side, we invested into this company called Caldera, which makes it really easy to like.
I know both. Yeah.
And so that's cool because it makes it easy to like launch a application-specific L2. And I think if you fast forward a few more years, spinning something up in crypto, like the hard part is no longer going to be like, how do you build out what you want to do using blockchain tech? It's going to be, how do you go and get users, which is how it should be. The hard part shouldn't be building the core tech. It should be going out and figuring out how do you actually get product market fit and usage and stuff.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on Ton?
I think it's like good for Telegram, and it's like it's beneficial to them. I think it's hard for it to like really break out of the Telegram ecosystem. Like I think if I had an application where I wanted to get better distribution in Telegram, maybe I would look at building on Ton. But as far as like something kind of more generic, I'd almost rather just build like a plugin or a bot or something like that to Telegram. It's one of those things where it's like it's good for Telegram. If I were like an investor in Telegram, I'd be happy about it. But it's probably not like super, super useful for like random dApp developers.
Is there anything that you missed in terms of investment that you kind of felt like you wish you didn't, basically?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest investment miss is definitely like Solana by far.
Solana.
I remember looking at one of their fundraising rounds. Kyle from Multicoin had introduced me to them, and it's sort of like, I thought the tech seemed interesting. It was kind of a unique, novel idea, and I think I kind of got mostly hung up on like the valuation. I felt the valuation was kind of high because it was kind of during like when all these alt layer ones were raising, and then like if you look in hindsight, obviously the valuation was really cheap, And so I'd say that's like the one like biggest miss that I have. Yeah, a lot of the other stuff, if you ask me like 3 years ago or stuff, ended up not being misses, like like
Okay.
FTX or BlockFi or whatever. It ended up being a good thing.
That was more of a relief.
Yeah, but Solana's probably the main one.
Give me a few that you guys have invested that you're actually yourself particularly like really excited about.
Yeah, so I mentioned two earlier, Polymarket and Pudgy Penguins. I think on the infra side, Caldera I think is quite interesting. We also invested in Kane Warwick's new company, Infinex, which
Oh yeah, he was here.
oh yeah, so I think they're cool because they're building a product that I've always wanted, which is like a kind of simplified brokerage style user interface to use DeFi, where you don't have to open up like 10 tabs. Like whenever I do something in DeFi today, I open up like 6 or 7 tabs and I see who has the best price or who has the cheapest lending rate, stuff like that, cheapest borrow rate. And so being able to do it all in one app, I think is really interesting. And I think they kind of have a lot of really interesting like UI UX ideas around that either not a lot of people have tried or not a lot of people have combined in the way that they're doing. So that's one I'm excited about. There's a couple other ones, but those aren't announced yet.
Okay.
That's probably the most recent one that
This doesn't
isn't
go
as-
out until like in if it's within the next week, you could say. Otherwise,
No, probably not. I mean, we invested in one company that's doing, without naming the name since it's not announced, we invested in this company that's basically enabling you to borrow against your Bitcoin in a way that is like basically trustless. So, think like old school BlockFi, but with the security model of something like Aave. And they've created a really interesting way of technically doing this that I think most people didn't think was even possible to do on Bitcoin. So I think that's interesting because it's basically opening up kind of Aave-style lending markets to the demographic of Bitcoin users, which is obviously a massive market. So that's probably another interesting one more recently.
some people say that the meme coin euphoria is a trend, and some align with Murad and say that it's gonna stay and it's gonna be a predominant segment in the crypto space. What's your take on it?
I think for the meme stuff, I mean, if you go back and look at the 2021 cycle, I forget the exact percentage, but I think memes peaked at something like 5% of total crypto market cap. It's probably up a bit now because of Dogecoin's recent rally over the last week, but prior to that, memes were currently about 2.5% of total market cap. And so it doesn't seem unreasonable to me that you could see them also, peak at a similar 4 to 5% of total market cap, which would mean that I think memes probably have a ways to run here. They started to kind of get a lot of traction this cycle, I think, for two reasons. One is that prior to Trump winning, memes were kind of the one thing you could do that was very legally safe. Like it's hard for the SEC to go after you because it has, it's like, well, if it has no value, it's kind of hard to be a security. And so there's some argument there. It's like, I don't know, is PayPay an unregistered securities offering? Probably not. And then I think the other reason is that people like them because they feel like higher beta, higher levered ways to get exposure to other assets. Like I own some Doge personally, and I basically view it as like levered Bitcoin. Like if Bitcoin goes up 5%, Doge is probably up 10 to 15.
I see.
And so I think the first reason, probably starts to go away after Trump wins because like it becomes more clearly, like I think it already was legal, but I think it becomes safe and clearly legal to do like DeFi in the US. But I think the second reason of like I want a smaller cap asset because it's like a higher levered version of some other asset, that probably still remains when it comes to memes, like WIF on Solana or Bonk or whatever, Doge for Bitcoin, PayPay for Ethereum, that sort of thing.
It's a really interesting perspective. How do you see the scene here in Asia?
Let's see. I mean, I think a lot of the interesting founders in Asia. So if you look at our portfolio, it's probably 50-60% US based companies, and the rest is kind of all over the world. Obviously, a good amount of Asia, not that much in Europe, really. There's just not that much tech in general in Europe, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
But for the Asian ones, I think one trend that might probably reverse is, prior to Biden, if you had a founder in Asia that was really strong, you might have invested in them when they were based in Asia, but most of them would end up moving to the United States, whether it's San Francisco, New York, wherever. Post Biden, most Asian founders kind of stayed in Asia. So if they're in Singapore, they definitely stayed in Singapore. There's no reason to go to the United States, especially if we see kind of clear legislation passed in the US. I think it probably starts to revert again, where you see some of those founders who were based in Asia start to move to the US again, just for like technical talent, also being closer to other projects that they want to work with. There's a good amount of like DeFi projects and protocols located, like the dev teams were located in the United States. So I could see that happening. And then I could see still a good amount of people kind of, founders and projects remaining in Singapore. I think that the part of Asia that has kind of fallen off, I would say, since like 2017 from a like builder standpoint, it feels like China. Like if you're a good builder in China, you either move to Singapore or the States or somewhere else. It's obviously still a very relevant market though for like public token purchases. The Chinese are buying a lot of gold. I imagine they're buying a lot of Bitcoin too.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. There's also a lot of people moving now to Dubai, and Dubai also has the thing with the gold and the Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting dynamic. How do you feel about the Bitcoin renaissance? There's been like a lot of focus on Bitcoin this year, people building on Bitcoin. What's your view on it?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think like, let's see, in 2014, 2015, you basically had something which really halted the development of Bitcoin, which was like Blockstream was formed and it had like, over half the core devs, and it was sort of like going to build, all the cool stuff on top of Bitcoin. And there was sort of this argument from Bitcoiners, which I never believed, but the argument was, oh, you don't need Ethereum because we're going to do it all on Bitcoin. And not only did that not happen, basically nothing happened on Bitcoin for 8 or 9 years. That sort of shifted when the BitVM paper was published kind of late last year. And that sort of like renewed people's optimism that like, oh, you can actually do cool things on Bitcoin. Blockstream hasn't thought of every novel idea, and you can do things where you don't necessarily even need their permission to do it, which is sort of at the core ethos of Bitcoin. And so I think that kind of kicked off a wave of people starting to build on Bitcoin and trying kind of new novel ideas that people hadn't tried before. And so I'm actually pretty excited about it. We invested in one company called Citria, which is like a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin, using kind of like a modified version of BitVM. And then also the lending thing that I was mentioning is also on top of Bitcoin. So yeah, I think there's like something to it. It's not going to like replace Ethereum in my view, but it's definitely like I would be shocked if some of that stuff didn't pan out.
I see. How do you see it being different from Ethereum and in terms of development?
I think the way I see it being different than Ethereum is probably a smaller, more constrained like set of use cases. Like I think, on Bitcoin, you probably will have pretty strong borrowing and lending protocols, but it's basically just going to be like Bitcoin versus stablecoins. And then I think you'll probably also see like financial products and exchanges start to exist, like, a way to go levered Bitcoin on Bitcoin natively, stuff like that. I think it's less likely that you see like a huge amount of like altcoins trading on Bitcoin or something. I know people have tried it with sort of the like BRC20 stuff, and then kind of closer to NFTs with like inscriptions and then runes and all this stuff. And that stuff took off a little bit, but then it kind of faded back down. It's I think the main difference between what you'll see on Bitcoin's DeFi landscape and Ethereum's is the Bitcoin stuff will be much more Bitcoin centric is my view. It's going to be like anything you want to do with Bitcoin, but probably not a ton of other stuff is sort of how I'd categorize it.
What's something that you think the industry needs to be closer to mass adoption that is not there yet?
It's an interesting question. I think probably two things. I think one of them is that like interoperability across different blockchains and different layer 2s and stuff problem isn't fully solved yet. And it's solved to some degree. Like a crypto native person can totally get from like Solana to Ethereum or from Ethereum to Optimism or whatever, or Arbitrum. But it's not like easy, and it's not like super seamless, especially for someone who's kind of like new to crypto. I feel like that needs to be abstracted more somehow. And then I think the other thing is just the like UX around secure non-custodial wallets still needs to improve. So what I mean by that is like most people feel much more secure just having their Bitcoin in like Coinbase or Coinbase Prime. And then it feels a lot more dangerous to like take it to a wallet that you're using like DeFi stuff with. And so for that to really grow, I think the UX there needs to improve and get better. Coinbase has launched this like Coinbase Prime Web3 wallet, which is actually pretty good. I think that could still improve further. And I think eventually, it probably takes another year or two of like design UI UX work. But I think, as those things start to improve, you can start to abstract it away. Like I think like if you look at something like Polymarket as an example, it's certainly much easier to use than crypto was 4 or 5 years ago. There's still kind of a lot of obvious stuff that I think you could fix on it on the UI UX side. I think they're just busy and didn't have time to do before the election. But I think if you look at like the Polymarket like a year from now versus the UX today, it'll feel even like way easier to use. And everything from like if you don't have coins on, on Polygon or whatever, it'll automatically help you transfer them. If you don't have, crypto already, there'll be fiat on-ramps that make it really easy to get it. If you want to trade $10,000, I would trust the, kind of wallet solution that they currently have. If you want to trade, $5 million, like you're probably using a ledger still. Like, and so I think there's kind of all these tiny things that if you add them up, crypto feels a lot easier to use. Kind of similar to how like in the early days of the internet, buying something like on eBay felt pretty scary. Like who knows if you're even going to get the item. Or in the early days of Airbnb, like staying at someone's house, that seems really weird. Are they gonna like rob you and take all your stuff and kill you? Like those are concerns that people have that people don't really think about as much anymore. And I think with DeFi, it's sort of like, am I gonna like click a handful of buttons and then I lose all my money? And so solving those sorts of problems to make it so like that doesn't happen and is sort of I think the main key.
I guess it's like trusting themselves. Looking after their own money because they're not used to that. You just put the responsibility on a company, and then if you have a problem, you call customer service or you have someone to blame. So seeing that shift in society would be really significant if people really, not just with their finances, but with everything. If that shift happens, how do you envision society? And also seeing the development of AI, for example, it's going to be like a whole new world. What are some of the things you see coming into the day-to-day life once DeFi is more part of people's day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I think like I guess first off on the AI piece, like I think that can also make it easier to use crypto securely, right? Because you can have like an AI agent that automatically checks the site you're using and make sure it's like a legitimate one and it's not a scam. You'll also be able to like tell AI agents like, hey, I want you to deposit, $10,000 of Ethereum into Aave, and I want to borrow $2,000 of USDC from it. I want you to send that to Coinbase, and I want you to wire that to my bank account. And, it'll just do all that stuff, and you'll wake up in the morning or in a day or two because bank accounts are slow, and you'll have the $2,000, right? And so I think that will help reduce human error and also increase the trust that people have like in themselves to do this stuff. I think if you look more, what does a future look like where people use DeFi day to day? I think one easier place to look is sort of outside the U.S. So there's this company called like Dollar App as an example that is founded by a bunch of former Nubank people who used to head up kind of crypto there, and sorry, not Nubank, Revolut. And if you look at that, they're basically making sort of like almost a new bank account where if you're in LATAM, you can sign up for it. You can basically hold stable coins like USDC. If you're not from LATAM, you can pay people in LATAM, so you can do like remittances using USDC. And then, you can earn yield in the stable coins. So I think one thing is that, when it comes to payments, stable coins are just like an inherently better technology than anything that's ever existed before because you can do them 24/7, very low fee globally. And so that's kind of the core starting point. And I think you have like, I don't know, a couple $100 billion, something like that in stablecoin market cap today. I think, over the next 5 years that probably goes to like $1 trillion or something like that. And then once you have stable currency, then you start to do more things. I think people will eventually sort of tokenize like versions of equities on chain, starting with like the indexes like the S&P and the NASDAQ and things like that. And then all of a sudden you have ways for people sort of outside the US to basically effectively buy access to US capital markets. And I think these also start to get to eat at the problem of like the government has historically been skeptical towards crypto. But if you have this huge, basically, influx of capital into U.S. capital markets because everyone wants to buy it because it's sort of the best assets in the world, then like that's actually a good thing. Like people are basically making the stock market go up because they're buying it with crypto. And then I think you also have kind of a more efficient financial system when it comes to things like, borrowing. Like if you look at the way borrowing works today, like even if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin or ETH in a centralized manner, it's pretty complicated. Like you have to sign like a contract with the company versus on Aave, it's just like a few clicks and there's no contract. It's just like, it's the smart contract is the contract. And so I think you'll see these kind of things start to play out. Like it's going to be slow. I think the best analogy I have is if you look at e-commerce, like market penetration in the United States, when Amazon launched, it was basically zero. During the pandemic, it shot up to like a whopping 30%. And so, even something like Amazon and like online commerce, it's still actually much smaller than like regular old school commerce. And that'll probably be true with crypto versus like the legacy financial system for quite a while too. But I think steadily over time, it becomes a larger and larger portion. And then 50 years from now, it's basically 100%. But it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. It's really interesting. For everyone watching, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Joey Krug, just my name, all lowercase, no spaces or anything. And then also if you want to send me an email, whether it's something about your startup or anything really, just joey@foundersfund.com.
Joey, thank you.
Thanks for having me.